Benjamin Castle are Americans. Watching the footy.
Liam Ryan saying, kick it my way, I want to jump over the pack, and here he comes! Ryan!
This is Buddy Franklin! This is the greatest showman!
Got the handball off to Myers. Myers looking for the lead of Stengel. Gee, they're good. Gee, they're sharp. Razzle dazzle Rioli.
Oh, who else? McDonald! Timber!
From inside the centre square. Boys kick the goal. Boys kick the goal. From inside the centre. Foul. I can't believe
Good time of day, everybody. This is episode 92 of Americans Watching the Footy. I'm Ethan Castle, coming to you from South San Francisco, California.
I'm Benjamin Castle, also coming to you from South San Francisco, California, where we recently watched 60 Minutes on CBS. And one of the features was on some guy named Mason.
Hopefully this helps do kind of what we wanted to do but haven't been so successful with, get more Americans interested in footy.
I mean, we've gotten a few people to start looking at it. I've gotten a couple of my friends to start watching.
We can get people to bet on it, but not to have that week-to-week interest. But hopefully this also just helps get more people interested in playing altogether.
Unfortunately, there wasn't anything about the USAFL in the feature at all, but I've made sure to mention them a lot on socials lately, and I know Barish is doing a lot as well. Nobody has done more in recent times to grow the game in the US than Brian Barish has, and he's been a really helpful resource for us as well.
So round 7 was a round of really a couple things. Huge blowouts, a couple super tight finishes, and guys kicking massive bags. I think that sums up pretty well, yeah?
Yeah, I was one round off for one of them in particular, but that didn't happen until the late game Saturday. You want to talk about one of those few tightly played contests to start off. You had St. Kilda 11-10-76, defeated by Port 12-11-83. Another compelling Friday night footy.
What's funny is this one at the start of the year, you would have looked at it and thought, why the hell is this a Friday night game? But ended up pretty entertaining.
I mean, we didn't think nearly as much of either of these teams to start the year, and now Port all of a sudden are 5-2, having won 4 in a row since Showdown. Charlie Dixon was back for this game. It seemed like he was on one leg for a lot of it, but was a big part of the forward 50 pressure, and in that way he helped make up for Todd Marshall's absence. But the big player in this one was Jason Horne-Francis.
He had a really strong fourth quarter to help the power hang on.
Well, not just a strong fourth quarter. This was his first real four-quarter performance. He had, I think it was 12 contested possessions, 9 clearances, 4 tackles, and 3 score involvements in the first half alone. And while he was played on more closely at stoppage in the second half, still got a couple more clearances, 6 more contested possessions in the second half. And you can start seeing that, this new age Port midfield is really starting to take shape and come into their own. Horne-Francis, along with Connor Rosie and Zach Butters. 149 tackles, Port with 82, St. Kilda with 67. Physical game also meant a lot of free kicks, but St. Kilda had double Port's total, and that makes it all the more impressive that the Power fought through some of their lack of discipline and some questionable umpiring to still win by 7.
They also did this without Todd Marshall. You mentioned Charlie Dixon playing on basically one leg. He made an impact when he needed to. And I thought Dan Houston was excellent.
I was hoping we'd get into his game. Maybe the most visible defensive performance of the round, a 3-vote Golden Fist game, I'm pretty sure.
I think he got the 3 votes there. Either way, he was really solid. And I think just my main takeaway from this game was the Saints were fine defensively, but they were not good enough to compensate for some pretty good opportunities that they squandered. And they also were the less efficient team inside 50.
46.3% disposal efficiency inside 50 for the Saints. Power were going at 55.1 again.
They also kicked 6 points below their expected score. Few set shots that they probably should have converted.
Yeah, but again, if you're above 50% with disposal efficiency inside 50, it's pretty clear sign of victory a lot of the time. I was talking with a couple people online who were bringing down the importance of the disposal efficiency stat, but inside 50, I think still does retain its relevance. And just touching on what impressed us so much about Dan Houston, what he did that the Saints lacked was that Houston was really well positioned in defense. He ended up being one of the movers along halfback. And while I've noticed a lot of his kicking throughout the year because he's a longer kick, and without Kane Farrell, that was more noticeable. Just he took the right angles, made sure to keep enough of the oval to himself, wasn't playing real close on a 1v1, and being that loose defender is a perfect role for someone like him. Also want to give credit to Jeremy Finlayson for good positioning in defense when he went back in the final minutes as well. Another strong game for Finlayson, including a couple goals. Charlie Dixon put Port up by 8 with 5:51 left off of a Dan Houston turnover, and then they kept the lead larger than a goal the rest of the way, in part because of a pretty significant miss from Jack Higgins with 3:03 left. Looked like he added first. And then from there, really, Port just did a good job in kind of the endgame phase. I thought at first maybe they had gone into endgame mode a little early, but it ended up working out for them. Surprised you just kind of skipped past what I thought was the most important play of the game. Let me go a little bit further back from that. So Finlayson's second goal gave Port the lead with just under 15 minutes left. Then Willem Drew, who we talked about a lot last week for having a good game, got to Jade Gresham and forced him to miss. Gresham had a really strong start to the fourth quarter and 6 touches and a goal already up to that point. After that, though, with about 12 minutes left, Josh Battle took an intercept mark and probably should have given away a blocking free kick to Charlie Dixon. No matter, Dixon smothered Battle's kick, and then Sam Powell-Pepper worked through a tackle to score. That brought the lead out to 8, 77-69, and at that point, I kind of was able to call game right there. I was a little nervous about it before Dixon got that last goal, but that's just a sort of winning play, and we've seen Charlie Dixon do it before. I'm not sure if you remember this game as well as I do, Ethan, but in round 10 of 2021, Port played Collingwood at the G, and Dixon put on a smother against Jordan Roughhead on a kick-in early in the fourth quarter. Dan Houston actually scored that goal, speaking of Houston. He brought that game within 7, and Port ended up winning by 1. So I had an instant flashback to that, and I just knew at that point when Dixon made that play, Port were going to win.
Yeah, that seemed like just a super significant moment, and one of the only lazy plays that the Saints have had so far this year. I liked seeing Ross Lyon's reaction. I think he's got the culture there, right? I know that's kind of a cliched term, but that they aren't regularly doing things like that. Where I think just largely they lost this game because they faced a talented team and just didn't play a great game. They played a solid game, but when Port play a good game, you're going to have to be more than just good. I'm still much more positive on the Saints than I was at the start of the year, and even if these next few weeks go poorly for them, it's going to be hard for me to really have a super negative opinion, although, if they were to lose to North or something this coming week, that's not going to happen. That would be significant. They've got a pretty friendly stretch heading into the bye, other than the trip to Adelaide next week. They've got a trip to GWS after that, and then they host Hawthorn. So you're looking at a team that could easily be 8-3 or maybe even 9-2.
8-3 would get me a little nervous knowing what happened last year. That was their record the first half of last year, and then they reversed that in the second half. But
their schedule's also a bit tougher down the stretch, although those Richmond games look less intimidating than before.
What St. Kilda need to figure out is they need to find better ways to play when they're forced to move more slowly. They were bombing kicks into the forward 50 a lot more because Port really clamped down on the corridor, kept them from having numbers going out of the defensive 50 for a lot of the game, because when the Saints had those numbers, they were able to get on those faster sequences like they want to get. But the marking targets need to be moving more when they're going more slowly. They need to be more willing to make those shorter connections, because that was what was missing a lot of the game. The Power have now won 8 games in a row at Marvel Stadium. That is the longest streak in the league. No other club has an active streak longer than 2. I mean, I would have expected one Victorian club at least to have 4, maybe 5 in a row. Of course, not Richmond, even before this week, but still surprised me. Travis Boak scored 1-1 from 30 disposals. He was the other best player on ground, I believe, other than Horne-Francis. He's really looking at home on the wing, and he had to go there pretty early because Xavier Dersma suffered a PCL injury after having an airborne collision with Rowan Marshall. He was subbed out, and PCL injuries can be pretty long-term, so it sucks for Dersma, but it's going to keep that wing opportunity open for Boak, and that would be a great role for him, it looks like, to close out his career over these next few years. Zach Butters had 27 disposals and 14 contested possessions. Ollie Wines had 26. Miles Bergman, a more visible game for him, a behind 21 disposals and 522 meters gained. Also was booed a couple times when I think Saints fans were wanting to boo Jason Horne-Francis, so I guess the Adelaide Advertiser isn't alone in confusing those two players.
This was probably Bergman's best game. He was really solid.
Probably. I mean, he was one of the rescuers in the back. Jace Burgoyne managed to settle into the game nicely after a rough start, and I'm liking what Dylan Williams has done since his inclusion, but Bergman's the one that really stood out to me. And among those other top performers, Dan Houston had a goal from 22 disposals, 9 marks and 7 tackles, and Horne-Francis' complete stat line, 25 disposals, 18 contested possessions, 11 clearances, and 468 meters gained. Really happy that he put on such a good full game performance in Victoria.
You know, with contested possessions, I always write out contested possessions on our notes instead of use the abbreviation CP, because when I think of CP, I think of Jared from Subway.
Let's not get demonetized.
On St. Kilda side, Jack Sinclair, who once again played really well along the boundary, had a behind, 33 disposals, 559 meters gained. Jack Steele kicked 1-1, though he did have a pretty significant miss, I believe. He had 28 disposals, 15 contested possessions, and 11 tackles. Rowan Marshall, a behind, 28 hitouts, 26 disposals, and an octopus.
Marshall's impact outside of the immediate ruck contest has continued this year, despite him being that first-rate ruck for the first time since Paddy Ryder came to the Saints a few years back. I was worried that wasn't going to happen, but he's adjusted to being that top ruckman again really nicely while still retaining his identity and play style on the rest of the oval.
Hunter Clark, who's been just pretty solid throughout the year so far.
You could tell that the Saints were missing something when he was out injured for most of last year.
A goal and 23 disposals. Callum Wilkie, 22 disposals, 10 intercepts, 9 marks. Jade Gresham, 2 goals, a behind, 21 disposals. Desire Wanganeen Miller, 20 disposals, and 8 marks.
Had the Saints won, I really would have identified Gresham as being one of the players who made that possible with his late runs.
Brisbane 17-13, 115, defeating Fremantle 10-7, 67. So this was mainly Benjamin's game, but my takeaway is basically Will Ashcroft's winning a car. Frio's defense sucked, but their gameplay was better. Their offensive approach was better, even though it didn't always work. They went to handballing more through the corridor and trying to actually just attack with their speed. So, right approach, shitty result.
I think they overdid it, though. In the first quarter, they had, I believe it was 78 handballs, which was the most of any team for a quarter this season. And look, I'm glad that they tried to return to their game plan that had worked for a lot of last year, really feeding off those overlaps. But between hot and humid weather in Queensland and them just seemingly having butterfingers for most of the game, it didn't work. And then they went back to the slower game style for the second half mostly. And while I wasn't pleased with it, I understood why, given the circumstances in which they found themselves. They were already down 31 at that point and needed to have cleaner disposals if they wanted to have any hope of getting back into the game. Ultimately, they didn't. The other biggest things I take away from it, Will Ashcroft deserves a car. If you didn't see his goal, it's not just that it was a Jackie Chan type kick where he kicked when he was completely off the ground, but it was at a pretty harsh angle and it was on the inside of the boot. You see outside of the boot kicks a lot, but you don't see quick kicks like that on the inside.
The whole thing was just insane.
For a 19-year-old to have the instinct to do that is unreal. Michael Walters also had a really nice goal, and I believe that was nominated as well. So we'll get into Sonny's stuff later, but in regards to what worked for Brisbane, they did their best work off of stoppages, and you combine that with the pressure they had when the stoppages didn't go their way. They got the ball quickly. Possessions, the midfield tended to get clean possessions. Lockie Neal had his biggest impact game of the year. 35 disposals, 24 contested possessions, 13 clearances, and 7 tackles. And Dane Zorko was strong in clearances, especially in the first half. He ended up with 5, and it's just looking much more like himself this year than last. Is it just that lifting of the burden of captaincy? He also is playing more of a forward role this year, midfield, half forward, as opposed to trying to be shoehorned in the back to maybe lengthen his career a bit. That didn't necessarily work last year, and they're so deep there anyway that the move wasn't necessary. Also, you don't often see Sean Darcy being outplayed, but Oscar McInerney, even though he had 9 fewer hitouts, had more meaningful possessions and ended up with 9 clearances of his own. And going along with the common theme for Brisbane's goal kicking, different faces were involved once again. This time it was Laken McCarthy and Zach Bailey. Bailey had been quiet in terms of actually getting on the score sheet for a couple weeks, but had his first multi-goal game since round 2. Really reward for a lot of good effort that he's put up these past couple weeks in contests.
The Lions are looking like the flag contender that I think they can be. They're really starting to round into form.
And again, as Cody Atkinson and Sean Lawson discussed in their ABC article this past week, their lack of predictability in terms of who's going to be featuring on offense really helps with that.
Anybody could be that guy. Night is young and the music's high.
The biggest question mark we had about Brisbane going into the year, though, was how they were going to make up for the loss of Marcus Adams defensively, and Brandon Starcevich mostly put the clamp on Michael Walters this round like he did for Toby Greene a week ago in Canberra, so he's really been the solution there to those big one-on-one matchups, while Harris Andrews has taken another important matchup, and Jack Payne and Ryan Lester also were those extra loose defenders at times. Meanwhile, despite Freo's defense scoring well in terms of fantasy, their actual defending leaves a lot to be desired. I'll just say it. Drop Brennan Cox.
Yeah, it's funny because he actually had a decent game in terms of fantasy performance after I had dropped him, but he did not play a good game.
It's more to Justin Longmuir to drop Brennan Cox. Yes, 23 disposals, 5 marks, a few tackles, but he hasn't been putting in 100% effort. He barely got to Dane Zorko's rolling kick from stoppage near the beginning of the game. He had a lazy smother attempt that missed, and Lincoln McCarthy managed to score near the end of the first quarter. He had a bad kick out of 50 that was turned over and led to one of Will Ashcroft's goals in the second. Just so many times throughout the game, I've noticed that he made plays that led to Brisbane goals. Freo are 2-5 now, and Longmuir's got to start sending stronger messages to the playing group.
Will Ashcroft kicked 2-1 from 28 disposals. Josh Dunkley, 28 disposals and 8 tackles. Hugh McCluggage, a behind, 21 disposals, 539 meters gained.
Remember when we thought at the beginning of last year McCluggage was this top Brownlow contender?
I mean, I didn't personally, but I saw him as like a trendy pick.
He tends to be that connector more by foot to the forward 50, whereas Neal does more of that work by hand. That's what I've noticed about his game.
I mean, nothing wrong with him. He's a solid player, just as of now, not Brownlow material. Harris Andrews, 20 disposals and 11 marks. Daniel Rich, also 20 disposals and 11 marks. 556 meters gained. Zach Bailey, 2 goals on 19 disposals. The Lions lost hitouts, 46-31. Pretty impressive work from Sean Darcy in that contest with Oscar McInerney, but couldn't really do anything to create any advantages out of it because the Lions still won clearances, 46-28.
And McInerney got a few of those on his own, even after Darcy taps, which is something that I've noticed more and more about his game in recent times, is that even when he loses the hitouts, he stays on top of the contest and often gets that first effective disposal away. Not much to talk about in terms of Freo stats. Hayden Young kicked it behind from 33 disposals and 685 meters. I'm liking more of his full ground game than I thought I would, lining up at more stoppages and a pretty effective long kick. The commentators were suggesting maybe to have him in more of a roving role. Andrew Brayshaw kicked 2 goals from 30 disposals. Caleb Sarong with 27 disposals. And Jager O'Meara, who had criticized some of his own efforts to start the year, had a decent showing with 2 goals from 18 disposals and 8 tackles. We'd also been critical of O'Meara to start the year, and he's got a chance to put on a pretty big performance this coming week against his former team, because Hawthorn are going out west. Hopefully Lloyd Meek is in. He had a good game in the reserves, and I think it would be pretty poetic if he had a good game against the team from whom he requested a trade.
I might have mentioned this last week. If Fremantle were a Victorian club, Alex Pearce would be catching a lot of crap for how he's done as captain.
As much as Patrick Dangerfield was the first 3 rounds, minus Dangerfield rounding it to 4 and being used really smartly. More on that later. All right, Sydney Derby 25. We've been hoping for another good derby, and we got one. Sydney 16-10, 106, defeated by Greater Western Sydney 17-5, 107. Ethan, you were in charge of this game, though admittedly I looked up from Lions Dockers a lot to take in how fun this game ended up being, though there were times in the third and early fourth quarter that both of us really thought this game was over. You texted it to me a couple times.
Yeah, this was a really interesting game that I felt for quite a while. The GWS were the superior team. Then the Swans came out and, after trailing by 10 at half, managed to take at one point a 17-point lead in the third. They led by 12 after 3 after a Tom Papley goal and celebration.
Oh yeah, he loves his celebrations.
Lead was 24 with 17:58 left, and team's traded goals was 24 again with 14:16 left, and then the Giants found a way. Toby Greene kicking a loose ball after Horne-Francis caught Harry Perryman. Really one of the only things Francis did all game. Perryman then scored off of a deflected dribbler when Matt Flynn won a ball up in the forward 50. There was a loose ball in midfield with a little under 6 minutes left. It led to Toby Greene finally finding Perryman. That cut it to 4, and then both teams kind of missed a couple chances. GWS kind of ignored having an open man and got intercepted by Jake Lloyd. Braden Campbell overshot Isaac Heaney and got picked off by Nick Haynes. Ryan Angwin, who had played a pretty nice game, had a lousy kick that nearly led to a Chad Warner goal, but Jack Buckley intercepted it right before the goal line, and that was huge because it kept the margin at 5. If he had just punched it through, then it's a full goal in front for the Swans.
So Warner didn't even get a point just for having a crack?
Not in that case. Horne-Francis did have a nice spoil on a kick for Toby Greene, but Nick Blakey ended up kind of sending it out of bounds, which right away the commentators noted that's going to let Toby Greene go forward into the 50 and get into this contest because he had been kind of on the edge of the 50 at that point.
Been having a lot of midfield time over the course of the game, some center bounce attendances where he'd done good work, but he needed to be forward in that moment. Blakey sending the ball out of bounds allowed that to happen.
And then, here's the funny thing. The 2 Swans players I was about to compliment the most for their performances in this game were Peter Laddams and Jake Lloyd. Laddams had actually played a really nice game, not just in ruck contests, but all over the ground. I actually really liked how he had played. And I'm usually very critical of him, and then he just kind of let Harry Himmelberg take this throw in, and he was able to get it to Toby. Toby's kick barely stayed out of Dylan Stevens' reach, put the Giants up with 42 seconds left. Lockie Whitfield then intercepted an Errol Golden kick, and eventually there was a throw in at about midfield with 17 seconds left that the Swans weren't able to do anything with, and Nick Haynes kicked it away, and the Giants have won yet another close game against the Swans. Just really funny recent trends in this rivalry. So if you look at all 25 matchups, the Swans' average margin of victory is 47.1. The Giants' average margin of victory is 24.8, but if you zoom in a little closer, the last 4 Swans wins over the Giants have been by an average of 40 points. The last 4 Giants wins over the Swans have been by 6 total points, which is the closest thank you, Sir Swamp thing that any team has ever won 4 straight meetings over a team. They don't have to be, consecutive meetings. Just their 4 most recent wins have come by 2, 2, 1, and 1 again. So a lot to take away from this game. Benjamin, I know you weren't really paying as much attention to it live and to go back after, but I'd love to know your thoughts before I give a bit more of my actual analysis.
Yeah, I mean, again, for the Swans, Laddams and Lloyd, over the course of the game, were the 2 players of whom I really took note. Lloyd was doing more work up the ground, and he didn't have, any late game errors that soured my opinion of his performance. Meanwhile, I guess Laddams' goal was to get pressure on Himmelberg right away, make that tackle, stop him from going any further, but I don't think so. I don't think Himmelberg just outstepped him there. I think Laddams actually was going to try and put the tackle on right away because I'd seen him do that a couple times in weeks past. You could tell, though, that he was starting to feel some of the pressure of Tom Hickey being close to returning because he was much more involved on ball and outside the ruck contest than usual. But for the Giants, I took note of Xavier O'Halloran early, had multiple goals again. Really liked what he's brought to the group since he came back in. Does some good inside midfielder work and is one of the better long kicks on the team as well, along with Himmelberg and Haynes. And he's been playing more forward than either of them for the past bit. And then you don't usually think of Toby Greene as someone who contributes so much in the midfield, but he really did this game. It was a real captain's performance. You know, we hear commentators talking about the captain's goal, the sort of in the guts, down and dirty plays that captains need to make. And this was a game where Toby Greene was really that leader he needed to be, not just at full forward, but in the forward 2/3. Also want to note another Toby real quick. Was thrilled that Toby Bedford was in for his first game of the year and that he scored the first goal. Yes, he ran too far twice, which was really funny, especially that it happened twice, but he's a player that I was really hoping to learn a lot more about this year because he'll get more reliable opportunities.
GWS were the better team for the bulk of this game. I thought if Sam Taylor was playing, they would be up by 20 at the half. Nick Haynes moves the ball well. He's got some intercept skills, but he's just not strong enough to do those one-on-one contests.
Himmelberg's needed to go back to support him a decent amount. Meanwhile, if you're looking at defensive work on the ground, decent for Callum Brown.
I didn't notice him a ton, truthfully. I noticed Connor Iden much more. Other Giants who made an impression on me, Lockie Ash has played a couple of quality games in a row. I'm liking what he's doing. And Ryan Angwin, even though he had a couple of screw-ups in the second half, I really liked his work along the wing in general. I think he's shown some promise, and considering he's only 20, he could be doing this for a long time. That was just his third game, by the way. And to be so mature as a defensive wing, making the kicks that he did, that was a really great takeaway from this game, and something that Adam Kingsley will probably be really happy to use going forward. And Angwin was also good when the Giants were in the defensive half. Noticed them switching sides of the field a lot. You noticed it more forward. I saw them starting to do it from defense, and just seeing how it wasn't, super predictable. They didn't do it all the time, but the kicks were smart when they made those kind of cross oval plays. Adam Kingsley could teach another Adam a lot about kicking in reverse like that. Adam Simpson, take notes of what the Giants did. Speaking of Kingsley, the real MVP of this game was actually his stress ball. They better start selling those in the team store or something. Like a stress ball with the Giants logo on one side and Kingsley's face on the other. I don't know, there is actually I think it is a Giants stress ball.
This week it was. I think he's had a stress mini Sharon in the past. But this needs to become a thing, and the Giants media team is savvy enough that I think it'll happen.
They had more quality big sound memes, plus one with, Isaac Heaney looking out the window and Toby Greene. They had fun this week. I mean, they have fun most weeks. My only complaint is that this was not a real rivalry atmosphere. Stadium was 2/3 full. I know the weather forecast sucked and it rained a bunch pregame.
Second and third decks were much fuller than the first. And thankfully the rain stayed away pretty much the entire game.
Yeah, the storm kind of passed just to the west of the stadium, so that worked out very nicely. But it didn't have that, crosstown rivalry feel that it deserved. Because I remember the 2021 meeting at the SCG, and there's this great shot of, GWS kicks the go-ahead goal, and we got the section of Giants fans going nuts. You didn't quite get that this time.
The Giants supporters weren't also in nearly as good a spot to be seen on the broadcast. I'm also just critical of this game being in one of those big overlap windows. Again, if you're wanting to grow the game nationwide, really lean into these crosstown rivalries. Give those rivalries out of Victoria their own time slots. Either have this be, the middle window so the whole nation sees it, or honestly, have this be the Sunday night game. I know we had a great one this round, but I'm certain that the AFL didn't look at Adelaide and Collingwood and think, oh yeah, this will be a game that everybody wants to see to end the round. So just better scheduling for those rivalries. Give Sydney Derby its own time slot. Give all of them their own time slots, because I think the games will rise to the occasion more often than not.
I know you've talked about them possibly doing them as the Friday night games before. I would be down with that.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially if you get tighter contests like this again. Waiting for the Swans to win a close one. That hasn't happened since Sydney Derbies 13 and 14 were by 13 and 16 points respectively. Actually, those are their smallest winning margins in a Sydney Derby, period. See, the dynamic of this rivalry is so interesting. It deserves more fanfare because you've got the big time club against the little expansion team. I think there's something really entertaining to it. It seemed for a minute like GWS were going to lose this game because they were really sloppy in the third, led to a bunch of goals when the Swans had already come out a halftime strong. Looked like Luke Parker was going to win the Brett Kirk medal.
Thanks, Basil.
Would have been his 6th and his 4th in a row, but it ended up going to Toby Greene. I think if you were to like make the list of standout GWS performers, especially down the stretch, that list would be him, Perryman, Whitfield, maybe Ash. Honorable mention to Callahan, and like I said, Ryan Anguinello. I guess he was more of a first half impact. I liked his game, so both these teams are 3 and 4 now, as we expected, of course. Swans are ahead by virtue of having a percentage of 104.6, while the Giants is 93.1. But the Giants kicked much more accurately this game. If you're looking at the expected score, the Swans were right on the money at 106, if you're including rushed behinds. The Giants' expected score via AFLX score was 84.9. They had good accuracy on longer kicks. I mean, they kicked 17-5. Schedule does get a lot tougher for the Giants the next few weeks. They've got the Bulldogs of Canberra. Then they make their lone MCG appearance of the year against Collingwood, host the Saints at Geelong, host the Tigers. It's funny now that, like, we talk about the Saints game with much more, like, oh shit, that's going to be a tough one than Richmond. Swans at Collingwood next Sunday. Then they host the Dockers in a game that a few weeks ago I would have been way more excited for. Now it's a game that might be necessary to keep them afloat. Then they're at North, and then they host Carlton. There's been some talk, including a lot of Donny Hess was involved in a few discussions about, like, it's too early to panic. I think as long as the Swans win 2 of their next 3 and go into the Carlton game at 5-5, everything's fine. If they lose more than 1 of the next 3, then I think it's time to actually be concerned. They do have the Saints and Lions going out of the bye, and that Lions one is a trip to the Gabba. They've also yet to have that rematch against Geelong. And they close out with the Crows and D's. I mean, the schedule isn't easy for them. They were runners-up last year. We rated their schedule as the hardest, a bit harder than the Cats when we were looking at the season preview, and it's living up to that thus far. I think they will round into form again. They still aren't completely healthy. I think they'll get there. I think they'll be, somewhere between 3 and 6 when it's said and done. Youth and inexperience has not helped them, though. That's been the factor in some of these tighter games. I've appreciated the chance to learn about some more of their younger players, though. Toby Greene won the Brett Kirk medal, kicking 4 straight from 22 disposals and 11 scored involvements. Again, a lot of that midfield work translated to that number of involvements. Tom Green had 31 disposals and 13 tackles on his return from suspension. I really like him at center bounces as well. Stephen Cornelio, 2 goals straight from 28. 15 contested possessions, 7 clearances, 564 meters, and at least 1 sentient eyebrow. Josh Kelly had 27 disposals, 6 clearances, and 6 tackles. Finn Callahan with 26 disposals and 10 marks. The 3rd pick from 2021 doing good work. Lockie Ash also on that young side. 24 disposals, 8 marks, and 476 meters. Lockie Whitfield showed up late defensively, had a couple of his 7 marks late. Harry Perryman kicked 3 goals straight from 21 disposals and 9 tackles. Just so much to be positive about with these younger Giants when we were really questioning how game ready they were at the start of this season and just what kind of an uphill climb Adam Kingsley had. Seems like it's not as harsh as we thought it would be. Giants were also plus 21 in tackles, 78 to the Swans' 57, led by Tom Green, did pay off. There was passion, there was aggression, there is fucking mindset.
There is passion, there is vision, there is aggression, there is fucking mindset in this football club.
I thought when they were struggling in the 3rd quarter that their path to victory was going to have to be kind of slow the game down because it was like, well, you're not going to get too many stops anyway, so just limit the number of events. You make it a low event game, so to speak, but instead they just ended up getting a few clearances and
scoring in bunches and pulling off one of the best wins of the year. Luke Parker, like I mentioned, nearly won that Brett Kirk medal. He had a goal, 33 disposals, 12 score involvements, 11 clearances. Chad Warner a goal, 29 disposals, 14 contested possessions, 557 meters gained. Errol Golden a goal, 27 disposals, and 14 contested possessions. Jake Lloyd, 25 disposals. Peter Laddams a goal, 34 hitouts, 24 disposals. Callum Mills, 23 disposals. Will Hayward kicked 3-1, 16 disposals and 7 marks. Buddy kicked 3-2. He's not like that surefire, accurate kick he once was, but he had a pretty quality game still. It was nice to see he still got a bit left in the tank, a bit more than it had seemed like just a couple weeks ago. Maybe just needs to work back into form over the course of part of the game to really be at his best for the next week. I believe he's at 1,054 goals now, so 3 from Ty Doug Wade for 4th all-time. And Hayward's a player that impressed me a lot last year, leading more than most of the other Swans forwards and getting good results out of it. 2 last very quick observations about this game. James Rowbottom, only 6 tackles and just wasn't very noticeable. Actually, I'm making 3 observations because I also noticed that Nick Blakey was basically non-existent. 12 disposals, 43 fantasy points. I still won, though. And I think the biggest reason the Giants kicked so accurately? Who wasn't kicking for goal much for them? Jesse Hogan. Yeah, I mean, no wonder. Didn't really notice him much of this one. Took a couple ruck contests, but yeah, the less Hogan kicks, the better.
In the middle window on Saturday, the Western Bulldogs 14-10-94 defeated Hawthorn 9-11-65. The Bulldogs did what they needed to do in order to get those midfield numbers to the right spots on the ground. Then they accelerate from there. But the biggest individual positive out of this game for me came from Hawthorn, and that was the return of Mitch Lewis from injury.
Yeah, Lewis only kicked 1-4, but
Hawthorn's game plan just had a lot more direction with him in there. Luke Roost and Chad Wingard can't quite be that main guy anymore. Lewis is able to take on bigger players, can leap enough, had one very good mark in particular.
You see just how many more opportunities Bruce gets because Lewis is out there,
rather than him having to kind of fill both roles at the same time, yeah.
Hawks played a good first half, actually led 48-45 at the break, and then went goalless for quite some time. They didn't get their first goal of the second half until there was 5:18 left in the fourth quarter.
Incidentally, Lewis was part of that.
It was a combination of getting outplayed and missing a few shots they probably should have converted, which, I mean, if you're going to go on a goalless drought that long, it's usually a combination of the two. They ended up kicking 2 behinds for the third quarter and then kicked 2-3 in the fourth after kicking 7-6 in the first half. Their final goal of the first half came with 3:45 left in the second quarter, so nearly a span of 2 full quarters before they finally broke that.
Another reason why I thought the Bulldogs were struggling this game is because they didn't have Tom Liberatore in stoppages. He was out concussed, and you could really tell that Jai Newcomb was getting a lot more opportunities because of that. Will Day with a few more clearances than he probably otherwise would have had. Liberatore took some time to get into top form last year, was there right away this year, and so having him out, even against a lesser opponent, was pretty damaging. And had Hawthorn kicked more accurately, really could have cost him. This is to say the Bulldogs played a bad game. They played well enough to win over probably about a third of the teams in the league, and fortunately, they were playing one of that bottom third.
Marcus Bontempelli was not the main story, even though it was his 200th game. Aaron Naughton ended up kicking 4-3. Caleb Daniel looked so solid at forward. He had a goal off 27 disposals and 7 tackles.
I think Daniel's move to half forward is probably the positional move that caught me the most off guard this year, but it's one of the ones that has worked the best because he's such a good kick with both feet that he could switch sides really easily. Just allow him to play somewhat loosely, and he'll find opportunities with his defensive instincts, allowing him to position himself really well.
It's funny, when I was looking at some of the changes the Bulldogs decided to make, I'm still not a huge fan of, bringing Josh Bruce back, but I think moving Daniel up has been fine because they've got more than enough good defenders that they were able to make this work, kind of spread things out, because that forward line can be so tall that having a smaller guy like Daniel that can get involved, I think provides some much needed balance there.
in terms of who did heavy lifting for the Dogs in the midfield, it was Jack McRae who really did that. Ever since Luke Beveridge realized, wait, he shouldn't be playing in full forward, McRae has had the type of numbers that we've expected. 26 disposals, 13 contested possessions, and 7 tackles. Just a couple good weeks in a row for him. And with some difficult games coming up, a stronger Giants team in Canberra, and then some difficult midfields against the Blues and Crows after that, he's going to need to be in top form. After the Crows, by the way, the Bulldogs go to Darwin to face Gold Coast, and the Suns played really well on the top end last year. Then they host Geelong and Port.
I think this is kind of a make or break stretch of games coming up for the Dogs where we'll really see, are they the same old finish somewhere between 6th and 8th, or are they a legit contender? Bailey Dale had 25 disposals, finished with 566 meters. Jason Johannesson continued his nice form with a goal and 24 disposals.
And we're really questioning why the Dogs would be so keen to keep him on, or why the Suns were looking to bring him in.
He wouldn't have made a ton of sense for the Suns, just it was kind of in spots where they were crowded. But he's been playing really well. Bailey Smith, 24 disposals, 7 clearances. Bailey Williams, a goal, 24 disposals, 8 marks. Adam Treloar behind, 23 disposals. His 92 fantasy points were the worst of my midfield. That's why I won this week. Made up for some shit games from Nick Blakey and Kyle Langford. Oscar Baker, 20 disposals and 590 meters. But my favorite moment of this game? Benjamin, can you guess what my favorite moment of this game was?
Well, Cody Waitman was able to keep things in his pants this time, so it wasn't that. Was it Fergus Green crashing into the post?
Nope, it was Arthur Jones scoring his first goal.
Oh, duh, yeah. Kind of forgot in all this that Jones still hadn't had his first goal. That was with 3 minutes to go. Adam Treloar fed him for that. I don't know, that just kind of slipped my mind, probably because the game was over by that point, so I was already starting to look toward the Eagles game.
I fucking love this kid. You can tell, a lot of the younger players just are having so much fun, and I think he might be having the most fun. I loved his work in front of the camera that he did after his debut, that Thursday night win against the Lions. Well, firstly, he just was so into things afterwards, celebrated with pretty much every single person in the stands that stuck around, and then great interview with Channel 7 to close out the coverage, and he's kept up with that enthusiasm, and he's provided a spark as a smaller player in the forward half that the Dogs have needed. It's just so cool to have young Indigenous men having so much success, and he's just such a bright, fun personality. His sign-off from that Thursday night interview, it's like, okay, you could probably take some of the commentators' jobs right now.
He'd probably be better with names than Dwayne Russell.
Before Benjamin gives Hawthorne stats, I do want to mention Liam Mc99 on Twitter, who does some stuff for Talking Hawks and is a co-host of Soaring to New Heights, had some good points that Seamus Mitchell really kept Cody Waitman out of the equation, and then it was weird that he ended up being the one that got subbed off for Jack Scrimshaw. But
that caught me off guard as well. Waitman having a down performance wasn't necessarily shocking. It was that Mitchell was the one who did such a good job on him that was a nice surprise.
20 years old. That was his 3rd game. Another guy that could be on that list of, the young next generation of Hawks. And I also noticed, I think it was the Hawk Talk podcast, they were talking about, you compare their performances to a couple other teams that we're going to talk about shortly. No, they're not tanking.
They had trouble finishing a couple games recently. Look, they're still going for it. They're young.
They decided, and I think correctly decided, that their best window of success is, rather than try to, scratch and claw their way into that 8th spot now, move things a couple years down the road and when you can really go for a championship. Because look, the goal is championships. And to maximize their championship window, their best hope at doing that is probably a window that starts sometime around 2025 or 26, rather than trying to make a long shot jump at it now.
Notable stat lines for the Hawks. Will Day a goal from 30 disposals and 7 clearances. Blake Hardwick could be one of their back 6 anchors going forward. 27 disposals, 12 marks, and 492 meters gained. Could he end up playing alongside James Sicily in that respect? Might Sicily age out before the window opens? Sicily had a goal from 26 disposals and 550 meters, by the way. Connor Nash also had 26 disposals, 22 handballs. Pretty efficient user by hand.
Seems to be his case just about every week.
Brian Myers' friend, James Warple, had a goal from 25 disposals, 14 contested possessions, and 8 clearances. Again, having Tom Mitchell out of the picture means Warple's playing a lot more freely. Though he had some inaccuracy in front of goal, Mitch Lewis had 12 score involvements and 11 marks from 16 disposals. Ned Rees had 43 hitouts and 15 disposals. I wanted to be part of the long-term solution. Not much time at center half forward yet. Maybe if Lloyd Meek gets back in, that'll open up for him. I really see the Hawks as having a good chance to win out west this coming week against Freo.
It wouldn't be too shocking to me.
At the start of the season, we would have written them off for it.
The coaches' votes for this game were really interesting. Nobody had more than 5. It was 2 guys with 5, 2 guys with 4, and 4 each with 3, which means, I guess, each coach gave 5 votes to one guy that the other guy gave no votes to, that being Will Day and Caleb Daniel. I'd love to know if some of these coaches' votes there's like some politics behind it. Like with high school sports, with voting on all league teams and stuff, you get it. So I hope with this there is. And as much as people love drama and clickbaity stuff in footy, there should be a lot more with this. Like, this should get headlines because people go nuts for all the headline type stuff, like, James Sicily's comments about Tasmania.
Kind of seems weird when your team plays there 4 times a year still.
And has them as a sponsor on your jumper.
Also, the Sir Doug Nichols round jumper for Hawthorn looks gorgeous. And they have one of the indigenous names for Tasmania for the sponsor name on that, which is even more awesome. Also, one last thing before we go to break here. We had the first unused sub of the year in this game. I'd asked you a couple weeks ago, Ethan, when we were going to see it, if we were going to see it. Toby McLean,
congratulations. Made history.
Congratulations. Get fucked, though your team still won.
It's history because he's the first unused tactical sub. I think that qualifies as
notable.
I mean, I'm sure sucks for him, but
congratulations, you done it. That counts towards your games played still. Actually, not get fucked then. You had that count toward your games played.
Let me see. On tables.
Look, James Jordan was the medical sub for the 2021 Grand Final. He got a medal.
It is listed towards games played on AFL tables.
Yeah.
Benjamin, 78% of our listeners are between 18 and 35 years old, so they probably want to start a podcast like we did.
How did you know that number, Ethan?
Thanks to the analytics we have for Spotify for Podcasters.
Formerly known as Anchor, sorry Freo fans, Spotify for Podcasters has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your phone or your computer. No fancy software needed.
It's so easy you can edit it while drunk.
And Spotify for Podcasters doesn't just allow you to upload to Spotify, you can also distribute your podcast on platforms like Apple, Stitcher, and more, just like we do.
Best of all, it's completely free.
Not only is it free, you can even make money from listener support or ad revenue. Hint, hint.
Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to podcasters.spotify.com to get started today.
As a reminder, you know what? This may not be a reminder because we've had a decent uptick in new listeners these past couple weeks, so welcome to those of you who are new to our show. Thanks for tuning in. You can find us on Twitter and on YouTube at Americans Footy. That's where we do our live tweets during the games, and we tag our tweets with our initials so you know which one of us is talking. I am individually on Twitter at BenjaminHK01. We'll provide some Eagles takes sometimes there.
I am on Twitter at Castle Media. That's Castle with a K. Brian Harambe, who is sitting right next to me trying to sleep, is on Instagram at CatNameDGrinan.
One of the reasons why I was so critical of the scheduling this round is because both of the games in the late Saturday window were terrible. That the smaller margin of victory was 90 tells you pretty much everything you need to know.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in Australia and you wanted to do something on Saturday night that didn't have to do with footy, you definitely had your chance to do that.
Definitely did not help that Luke Davies-Uniacke was ruled out of North's game at the G against the Ds with a heel injury. I mean, North would have gotten run over anyway.
I don't think it would have been this bad. Melbourne 22-7, 139, defeating North Melbourne 7-7-49. You thought Geelong Sydney was lopsided, this took it to a new level.
Even though the margin of victory was less in this game by a little bit.
It could have been a lot worse. The Ds took their foot off the gas. They led 37-0 just over halfway through the first quarter. It was 93-15 early in the third. Largest lead, I believe, was 108, and then Melbourne could have easily put up at least 160, maybe 170, and probably could have held North under 40 if they had really wanted to.
By the way, this was Melbourne's first game with a 50-point first quarter since round 20 of 2018 against the Suns. I mean, what else to really talk about here? Good game for Brody Grundy against Todd Goldstein. Grundy seemed to be getting a bigger share of the ruck work than Max Gawn. Makes sense when Gawn's still coming back from injury, couple weeks into being at AFL level again. And, tough battles against Goldstein. I mean, I guess the biggest thing actually is just that we should be wishing well to Charlie Coleman because it was a nasty leg injury for him. I also like that Simon Goodwin opened his press conference by wishing him well. Just unfortunate that North were already a bit shorthanded with LDU out. Coleman got hurt. Callum Coleman-Jones was also concussed in his first action for the year. This road's not going to get much easier for North. We knew that this was going to be a tough season for them and just a tough stretch of games in particular.
Ben Mackay went through a game without getting hurt.
Yeah, how much good's he going to be able to do against the Saints, Power, Swans, Pies, and Bombers in that order? I hope we haven't seen their last win of the year.
At some point, they'll win another game. Just the question is, will Alistair Clarkson be willing to take on this sort of challenge a second time? Because Hawthorn were like this when he first showed up there, and it's
18 years later for one.
It's tough if it's not your first run as a head coach to have the patience to deal with all of that. I think, this is where you really appreciate having a young coach with some energy. But again, the idea behind Clarkson was more about stability than about, young guy that's ready to kind of rally the troops.
Hopefully he stays up for the challenge.
The one other thing I wanted to say about this game, Benjamin called Cade Chandler balling this year. He was spot on with that, so nice job.
Yeah, Chandler, 3 goals straight from 21 disposals at 8 marks. I wasn't so sure about Chandler being to keep up with his strong season as much after Kazi Pickett came back, but the D's have found use for both of them. They've each had their own space in the forward 50, and the team's all the better for it. Also, Kazi signed his 4-year contract extension this week. So, sorry, Freo fans. I guess Liam Henry to Melbourne is probably more of a reality now than ever, although, that isn't much of a loss, but yeah, I'm glad Kazi's staying, but I think he's one of those guys that, no matter who you're a fan of, you enjoy watching him play. He and Sam Powell-Pepper are probably the 2 non-key forwards I enjoy watching the most. Clayton Oliver with his usual 37 disposals. Christian Petrarca, 3-1 on 35 disposals, 14 score involvements, 8 marks, 552 meters gained. Angus Brayshaw, a behind 29 disposals, 11 intercepts. Congrats to Gus on his 150th. Tom Not Jack Sparrow, a goal and 23 disposals. Jack Viney, a goal and 22 disposals. Trent Rivers, a goal and 20 disposals. Brody Grundy, 2 goals, 27 hitouts, 18 disposals. Hitouts were 48-25 in favor of Melbourne. Surprised that Todd Goldstein wasn't able to do a little bit more there. Efficiency inside 50. 46.9% for the D's. Felt a lot higher, probably because of the way the game started. I think it only declined when they let their foot off the gas. Probably also because of what North's was.
27.5. And it's funny because it's not like North had many chances early. I guess it was just later in the game in those spaces where I wasn't really watching very closely. And it was just all right, pay attention if someone scores or gets hurt and then write that down, or if something suspension worthy happens.
Nothing did, thankfully.
Here's a couple of misleading stats for you. Or not so much misleading, it's just
interesting stats that exist but do not matter. Hi, John Boy and Jolly Olive.
Yeah. North had 29 more marks for the game and 7 more bounces, 9-2 on bounces.
Honestly, I can understand the mark stat really easily if it's just a lot of uncontested ball, trying to figure out the right angles. We saw that a lot from Freo in the first couple rounds. The bounces make sense. Max Gawn is Melbourne's captain. Of course, he doesn't want him to bounce.
I want him to go his whole career without one. Or maybe just have one bounce in the final game of his career just for shits and giggles.
A bounce before his last kick.
I really hope he's totally aware of this.
Oh, I think he is.
He has to be. But he seems like a funny enough guy. Also, question if we have any D's fans that can answer this. I've noticed in the cheer squad there, they've had Pac-Man ghosts regularly. I'd love to know the backstory because I'm sure it's something funny.
Notable stat lines for North: Aaron Hall and Harry Sheasel both with 30 disposals. Hall with 12 marks, Sheasel 11. I'm glad that Sheasel got more time with the ball this game because he certainly didn't last round. Ben Cunnington with a goal from 27 disposals, 19 contested possessions, 11 clearances. Cunnington's goal was right at the end of the game. Liam Shields a goal from 27 disposals. Luke McDonald with 24. Jai Simpkin with 24. 10 marks, 536 meters. Jack Siegel with 20 disposals. Aiden Core with 18 and 10 marks. But really, if I'm reading most of those stat lines off, it's probably for fantasy purposes more than anything. But this isn't a fantasy podcast, so let's get a move on here. West Coast Eagles 6-8-44, defeated by Charlie Curnow 9-3-57. What? Why are you laughing? Am I not correct?
No, you're right. That's why it's funny.
Oh yeah, Carlton 23-14, 152. You knew the Eagles were going to get outdone this game. I didn't expect it would be this bad. 21-point lead at quarter time, 40 at halftime, and then Blues went 5-0 in the third. I lost interest in this game really quickly, and it seems like a lot of the Eagles players did as well, which was the most disappointing part.
I never had interest in this game.
Of course you didn't. The Eagles were out of their depth. They weren't able to regroup and get back in defense after stoppage losses or after turnovers. I mean, what Eagles players actually played well in this one? I mean, Oscar Allen did have 2 goals, kept that multi-goal streak alive. Tim Kelly worked through George Hewitt, tagging him to get somewhat involved. I like that Jaden Hunt is on the team. Reuben Jinby had 7 tackles, but I didn't see him on the ball enough. And just the unfortunate thing is that Rhett Bazo also got injured in this game. He was a sub. I guess he might not be fit enough yet to play out a full game, which is also unfortunate because really would have been nice to have him against one of those talls because I'd back him in for a full game against the likes of Charlie Curnow and Harry Mackay above Josh Rotham. As much as I thought Rotham was going to be better this year, it just hasn't clicked for him. Whether as that second ruck or as center half back, he's not primed for that role. I did like that the Blues remained unselfish. Charlie Curnow probably could have had 11 or 12 goals had he really wanted it, but both he and his fellow Coleman medalist in Harry Mackay were willing to pass off the ball. You had a couple players kick their first AFL goals. Ollie Hollins had the opening goal, and then Brody Kemp had his late. Patrick Cripps also got his first of the year, though he really created that one. Was surprised that Cripps hadn't got on the scoreboard yet, but he did in this one. Biggest individual thing I noticed, other than Curnow's 9 goals, Adam Chera has gotten much better as an inside midfielder, and it really showed in this game.
Quick question for you before I run down a couple of stats.
Fire away.
At what week could we see a healthy enough Eagles team that they're competent again? Because the team we saw in the first couple rounds, it wasn't good, but it was competent. It was respectable.
That win over the Giants is looking better. I mean, if they'd stayed healthy, they would have won Western Derby, and I don't think you can question that. I mean, looking at the injury list, maybe a month and a half if Shuey can get back. Noah Long. Hopefully Brady Hoff is up to full fitness because I really like Hoff. You don't expect Elliot Yeo to be playing for more than 1 or 2 games at a time because he's Elliot Yeo. Look, I'm not a fan of tanking. I do want them to beat Hawthorn in Tasmania. That's a gettable game. I want them to get to North in the rematch out west in late July. They're capable of it. But I also don't want injuries to be the only excuse from the club. The effort wasn't there.
All right, stats for Carlton. We've already spent too much time talking about this. It's hard to even call it a game. Blake Acres, a goal, 34 disposals, 11 score involvements, 10 marks, 499 meters gained.
Glad he's on my fantasy team. Really big totals these past couple weeks despite not having huge impact against the Saints. Look, this was a stat padding game for the Blues.
Him having such a big game in his return to the West is funny.
Not much booing for him because, wasn't against Freo.
Nick Hello Newman, a goal, a behind, 34 disposals, 14 marks, 10 score involvements, 471 meters gained. Patrick Cripps, goal, 33 disposals, 23 contested possessions, 13 score involvements, 8 clearances, 8 tackles. George Hewitt, in addition to tagging, had 32 disposals, 11 score involvements, and 8 tackles. Adam Chera, not woof. A goal, 30 disposals, 11 score involvements, 8 marks, 8 tackles, 524 meters gained. Sam Walsh, a behind, 30 disposals, 11 score involvements, and an octopus. Adam Saad,
Wolf, and yes, not just potential Wolf, he played.
he was subbed out, but it was managed. It was planned. He had 25 disposals. Sam Doherty with his quick return, 24 disposals.
Welcome back. Please stay healthy.
Brody Kemp, a goal, 22 disposals, 13 marks. Charlie Curnow, in addition to those 9 goals and 3 behinds, 18 disposals, 14 marks, 12 contested possessions, 475 meters gained.
Did he have a single mark outside of the forward 50? Maybe a couple. I mean, he had a couple marks that I don't think resulted in scores.
Let's see, marks inside 50, 11. So that would mean he had 3 that weren't.
Yeah, and a couple goals were from open play.
Jacob Wiedering, 17 disposals and 10 marks. Couple of staggering stats in this game that need to be noted, just to give a sense of how one-sided this was. Disposals were 452 to 285.
That's a difference of 167 quick maths.
Uncontested possessions were nearly double for Carlton, 307 to 159. Marks inside 50, 29 to 4. Disposal efficiency was 78.3%. The Eagles were actually not terrible, 66.3, but inside 50, 71.4 to 44.1. So this was,
Again, inside 50 disposal efficiency is usually indicative of result.
so yes, the score was indicative of just how lopsided this game was.
Tim Kelly with 27 disposals and 8 tackles despite the tag. Liam Duggan, 23 disposals, 8 marks and 602 meters. Jaden Hunt, 23 disposals and 554 meters. Ruben Jinby, 7 tackles. I'm glad we're done with this game. The country game in the city. Why does Geelong not host a country game?
I mean, it's just, I guess the Geelong-Essendon game is just the country game. I don't know, it's funny because, like, for example, the Bulldogs are the ones that play at Ballarat. You know, you had the game at Mount Barker a couple of weeks ago. That was a country game. Tasmania, where you have just, like, the farm in the background with just, like, some stuff on fire.
Oh yeah, they had a controlled burn during one of the games there. It might have been the Anzac Sunday game.
I think it was the Anzac. I don't know if it was what you would call a controlled burn or if it was just like burning off waste, but it was really funny just to see that in the background.
We expected the game to be a tire fire. It wasn't. But yeah, country game. Essendon 16-8-104, defeated by Geelong 20-12-132. And before the game started, Chris Scott did a Chris Scott. Late change.
Yeah, Zach Toohey had back spasms. I've had back spasms. They suck. Mitch Nevitt came in for him, and then Tanner Broom was the sub, and he had to get subbed in pretty early because Jack Bowes had a calf injury, but Cats jumped out to a very quick 38-0 lead. Tom Hawkins had 4 goals with 6:23 left in the first quarter.
Should have had a 5th near the end of the first, but just missed from straight in front.
He nearly had another, but he marked a Brian Myers kick a couple seconds after the siren.
Brian was robbed of a couple assists in this game. Did end up getting 1.
Yeah, could have had 3. He had the one interrupted by the siren, and he had the one that should have been the first goal, but Isaac Smith missed. Cats' offense was firing on all cylinders, which didn't surprise me. Had an 88-44 halftime lead. Essendon did cut it to 23 in the third, but the Cats got the next couple goals to settle things down. Hawkins got his 7th, and then Cameron snapped from 56, and Brandon Zerk-Thatcher couldn't quite get his finger on it.
Zerk-Thatcher and Jordan Ridley switched their 1v1s at halftime. Zerk-Thatcher was punked by Hawkins in the first half. I mean, just Tom Hawkins was Brandon Zerk-Thatcher's dad. Zerk-Thatcher played like his pants had been pulled down, even though Nick Martin was the one whose pants were pulled down. It was Tom Atkins who did that, I think. I had my concerns about Geelong's defense in the third quarter. They looked multiple steps slow. Essendon were getting the faster runs that they've thrived on for most of the season. They were getting to the outside. They were quick to play on. Brad Scott clearly sent the right message at halftime, but it didn't last because Geelong managed to keep the ball out of their defensive 50. And even though Patrick Dangerfield was only on the field for 64% of the game, when he was on, he was the best player. So they've managed him really smartly thus far, and they've rested him enough to the point where he can just be the ball of a player that he is at his best off-center bounces.
Here's the kind of conundrum that comes out of that. You want him on the ground as much as he can because you notice when he's not out there. Essendon, a couple of their bigger scoring runs in the first half. in the third quarter came without him on the ground.
Yeah, 64% was the lowest percentage on ground for any of the 44 players who started this game and didn't get injured like Bose was.
But you've got to find a way to keep things going when he's not on the ground. So I think you're going to have to be strategic with who's on the ground when he's not. Who's going to make up for him off stoppages? You could tell that they were without Cam Guthrie for this game. He was kept out by a toe injury. At his best, Guthrie can make up for Dangerfield being off the oval. He hasn't been at that form yet this year. I knew Geelong's forwards were going to have a lot of success against the Essendon defenders. I did not think the midfield would be so successful, but they really had their way with them. Not only were they faster, but they were just so much stronger. Jake Strayer was really the only one who can body up to them.
A lesser game from Zach Merritt, who definitely is a bit slighter build. Merritt was tasked with playing on Dangerfield at times in the second half and limited his impact a little bit, but not enough to turn the game because, again, once Geelong were able to weather that early third quarter storm, the result wasn't really in doubt. They'd locked it up by three-quarter time, at which point they led by 6 clean kicks. And it actually was 6 goals, 17-6 to 11-6. Sam De Koning was asked to do some pretty heavy lifting in this one, and I think him being fatigued factored into Essendon getting better opportunities in the forward 50 in the third.
I'm totally down with him and Blitzov splitting ruck duties instead of playing John Seglar. I did not expect Sam Draper to lay an egg for a second straight meeting, and then Andrew Phillips ended up getting subbed out because he was ineffective. But yeah, the defense suffered with De Koning having to take so much ruck duty. That's where having a healthy Jack Henry could allow De Koning to do more up there. It's not a knock on Sam at all. He's just being asked to carry a lot right now. The lead was 47 with 10 minutes left, and then the Bombers got a few more late goals. Sam Wiedemann ended up with 5. So it made the game look a little bit closer than it was. Essendon ended up with 26 points in those final 10 minutes. I'm not going to sweat that too much. They also kicked very accurately. Both teams did. Teams combined to kick 36-20, and there were only a couple of kind of like facepalm misses. Yeah, I was surprised by how poor Kyle Langford was and how ineffective Zach Merritt was. Positives, Zach Guthrie's instincts are getting so good. He had this great play at the start of the fourth quarter where he fell, and John Caldwell ended up kind of tackling him after, but Guthrie ended up basically holding Caldwell on top of him and managing to get the ball out, which was just like, you can't teach that. That's not a specific thing that you go over in training. That's inherent.
You have that or you don't, and Zach Guthrie has it. His brother probably does too.
Mark O'Connor deserves a lot of credit because he ended up with 3 assists in this game. He had a great first quarter and did a lot more than just defend. I think of him as the Lachie Neal tagger, but he does a lot more than that. When needed, he can come up and kind of play that halfback role, move up some, and I really liked his game.
I think the first few games this year have really allowed people to identify more of O'Connor's full skill set. I spotted it late last year and told you to look out for it to start this year, Ethan, and I was right.
And Tanner Bruhn did a very nice job in that sub role. I was very pleased with his performance. I think he's starting to figure out the expectations more, and I think the coaches are starting to understand how to deploy him better. All right, stats for Geelong. Patrick Dangerfield behind, 28 disposals, 15 inside 50s, 10 clearances, 3 assists, 681 meters gained.
15 inside 50s, 1 off the all-time record, which is shared by a number of players, including, I believe, Jaden Short. Had he played, at least 10% more game time, he probably would have the all-time record to himself.
I think that's 64%. He also got to sit a bunch in the fourth quarter. All that criticism about him from the first 3 weeks, pretty quiet now.
Are they cooked, Kingy?
He actually went and said, they're good.
Kingy's game analysis is excellent. His ladder predictions are shit.
His big picture stuff is not great, but him talking about a team making a move up the wing or something, I love hearing that. Tom Stewart, 26 disposals, 12 marks, 577 meters. Brian Myers, 24 disposals, 10 score involvements.
Only 1 assist, though.
Again, could have had 3. Should have at least had 2. Jeremy Cameron, 3 goals behind, 20 disposals. Zach Guthrie, 18 disposals, 9 intercepts, and 8 marks. Max Holmes showing off just insane speed once again. A goal and 18 disposals. Also, he got kind of hit in the throat at one point by Darcy Parish, which could be a really funny thing to look back on if they're teammates in a few months, which I'm hoping for. Tom Hawkins, who unsurprisingly won the Tom Wills Award, 8 goals behind, 16 disposals, 12 marks, 2 assists. As usual, the Cats were superior from stoppage. They won stoppage clearances 13-9, and they won contested marks 12-3.
For some reason, I thought there were going to be more contested marks in this game. I guess it's just the key for duo outworking Zerk Thatcher and Ridley. Not having Jaden Laverty there to support them or take one of those assignments at times really hurt as well.
Assuming Peter Wright's back by the time these teams meet again, Essendon could answer more there. I think it would be fun to watch Sam DeConing or Jack Henry or Tom Stewart. I assume it would be DeConing. Any of those go up against him. That game is at Geelong in round 18.
Heck, you could even have blitz-offs at times going back and matching up against 2-meter Peter.
I think for now, as Stanley's out, Blitzovs needs to have a bit more ruck duty just because as good as DeConing is at it, his skills are most needed defensively until Jack Henry's back.
And that was apparent based on when Essendon got their better chances. Potential future Cat Darcy Parish had 38 disposals, 10 scored involvements, and 9 clearances. Nick Martin, 22 disposals, 11 intercepts, and 9 scored involvements, even though Dwayne Russell confused him for Zerk Thatcher once. Russell also confused Sam with Tom DeConing and Zach with Cam Guthrie. What the fuck, Dwayno? Was he not at the ground?
He missed a bunch of names.
Maybe he was focusing on his catchphrases too much.
I like the guy, but you need to know who people are.
Arnie Jones wouldn't make those mistakes. Jai Caldwell had a goal from 20 disposals and 8 marks. Of the notable goal scorers, Dylan Shield with 2 goals, 22 disposals, 11 scored involvements. Jake Stringer scoring 4-1 from 26, 20 contested possessions, 11 clearances, and 529 meters. He was Essendon's best player. And Sam Wiedemann with 5-1 from 14 disposals. And remember, Sam Wiedemann's grandfather was a premiership captain. Not for Essendon, though. Collingwood, 1958. Would have been a fun storyline had he showed up and been a factor late on Anzac Day.
Richmond 6-12-48, defeated by Gold Coast 11-6-72.
I get why Dimma doesn't like coming to Marvel Stadium. They can't kick for shit.
They had that game against GWS a couple years ago there that was super fun. An high story if they won, but not on Sunday. I mean, it wasn't just that they didn't kick well. That wasn't the only reason they lost this game. Let's not kid ourselves there.
I mean, they had one more score than the Suns. Expected score actually showed Richmond still losing this game, just not by as much, like by a goal or so less. So maybe it's just that Richmond took some low percentage shots because they started 1-5-11 in the first quarter and were 2-9-21 for the first half. Only 6 goals in the first half altogether. The Suns led by 5 exiting it. And then within the first half of the third quarter, we had 6 more. And I mean, the third quarter was the most exciting quarter just because there was actual accurate goal kicking there. The Suns made good on their inside 50s in the third because neither team did early on. The Suns actually only managed 3 shots for their 16 inside 50s in the first, but in the third, they scored 6-1 from 14 inside 50s. Meanwhile, Richmond only scored 2-1, and that was just a product of both the Suns having the right ideas for the first half, spotting the right connections, but just not sticking the marks they needed to. They managed to actually hit those marks properly in the third quarter, and it was their highest scoring quarter of the year because of that. And they created better shot opportunities. Richmond were also definitely disrupted by Gold Coast defense. Charlie Ballard consistently won out against Jack Reevil. Did not expect to be saying that coming into this game or into this season. But I like the fact that Charlie Ballard was my sleeper pick for Gold Coast just for being an important player that not a lot of people talked about. If anybody got focused back there, I mean, Lockie Weller and Will Powell were out to end last year, so really it was Sam Collins that was highlighted in the back for the Suns that was staying on for 2023, but Ballard's really worked himself to the conversation as a really strong one-on-one defender. The Suns defenders were aggressive in their one-on-ones, and it worked. And elsewhere on the oval, Weller did have his fuller ground impact, got up the wings, ended up getting an assist on the last goal of the game from Ben Ainsworth, who's been a more accurate kick this year. Another good goal-kicking game for Ben King as well. He had 4. If you ever have trouble differentiating between Ben and Max King, give him each a Sharon and 10 set shots from 30 meters out. Ben probably kicks 8 of them. Max, actually, you know what? If Max kicks the first one accurately, watch out. But if he misses the first one, he might hit 3.
Just have Max kick from anywhere, and if he misses the first one, he'll miss all the rest. And if he makes the first one, he'll make like all of them.
When Richmond were at their best, they were getting those overlap sequences that we've come to expect from them over the past decade or so under Damien Hardwick.
I've learned that sometimes like players call that, kind of like give and go handball a 1-2.
Yeah, I noticed that on the broadcast as well, but even when it's not a 1-2, just those overlaps in general, they increase their pressure later on in the game. They had some clearance success in the fourth, but not enough to turn the tide. Before that, their work rate and just lack of creativity, predictability in terms of where they were looking for marks was criticized on the broadcast, and I understand that. Tyler Young, in particular, had a poor defensive game for Richmond, was responsible for multiple goals. The question now is, does Dimma just drop the axe on him really quickly and send him back to the twos when Noah Balta is still a question mark, especially kicking out of defense? Or does he back him in to respond and have a better game against the Eagles? Holy shit, the Eagles are a chance at the G against Richmond. Wait, why the heck are Richmond not playing at Marvel 2 weeks in a row?
I mean, West Coast, when they're competitive, are a decent draw, I guess.
Not this year, even. Not this year.
They had an okay turnout at Marvel when they played North, at least.
Those were more North fans than anything.
No, but there were Eagles fans there.
Some. I mean, Eagles fans who are in Victoria are excited to see them come over, but you don't expect Richmond to come out in droves for that next game, especially after the effort they gave. I mean, they're at 1-5-1 for a reason.
You mentioned that play by Tyler Young. I remember Yvonne Solo also had a really, really stupid play at one point.
I think it was, he got a mark from Jack Ross inside 50, and Solder decided, nah, I'm not going to shoot this. But he took too long to decide that, and Lockie Weller spoiled the kick he was trying to get to Tim Torano. So, bang.
The one negative I have from the Suns is that Bailey Humphrey had like one touch before getting subbed out.
Yeah,
he's young. Young players have consistency issues. I really liked his game in the couple weeks before. He'll be fine. I just hope they give him more opportunities because he could be someone who factors in for a couple of years.
Before he goes to Geelong.
Or some other Victoria team. He played for Gippsland, so
watch him try to go wherever Harley Reid ends up. Yeah, that was Humphrey's first time in the 18. Also, welcome back Rory Atkins. Nice impact going from the defensive wing to midfield. Atkins had 25 disposals, 11 marks, and gained 547 meters. Guess we're just kind of getting into the stats on this one because not much else to talk about here.
Well, I'll say this. Once Soldo scored off of the 50 that he got from Jared Witz accidentally punching him in the face, I thought, all right, Richmond should take over, and then all of a sudden the Suns were out to a 3-goal lead, and then before the end of the third quarter, they really pulled away, got back-to-back goals from King and Holman to put them up 28, and Richmond did get it down to 15 with 11:41 left on a Samson Ryan goal. At that point, it was like, ooh, they got something cooking here. They got 6 of the first 7 clearances to start the quarter, and then you had that dumb Soldo play, and they didn't score another point after that.
I would like Nick Holman's game to start the year, the kind of scrappiness that the Suns need a bit more forward. Going from defense at times, just all over the OE, you can also see that from 2019 Richmond Premiership player Brandon Ellis, who had a goal for 25 disposals and 8 marks. Let's go. In his case, yes. Braden Fiorini should have a more prominent role as well with Tuke Miller out. He had a goal from 20 disposals and 19 marks. David Swallow had 17 disposals, 7 tackles. Jared Woods a goal, 35 hitouts, winning out against Yvonne Soldo. 12 contested possessions and 8 clearances. Defensively, you got Sam Collins with 10 marks. Charlie Ballard with 10 intercepts and 12 marks. Darcy McPherson, a really no-derp game from him. That was very nice. He had 9 marks for 31 disposals. Always a big possession guy. Will Powell had 28 disposals, 13 marks, 10 intercepts, and 544 meters. And then for the midfield duo, I guess, because no Tuke Miller, Matt Rao, 26 disposals, 14 contested possessions, 9 tackles, and 8 clearances. It was the Powell-Rowell Power Hour, with enough of a touch of Noah Anderson, who kicked 1-1 from 32 disposals, 9 clearances and 9 marks. Against better opponents like the D's, Dogs, Crows, Blues over these next 5 weeks, those are 4 out of the Suns' next 5 games, the other being a trip to play the Eagles. I want to see how much Rowell and Anderson could really carry that midfield, probably with Fiorini supplementing them. Efficiency inside 50 this game was
Not great, Bob.
39.6% for Gold Coast, 34% for Richmond.
Business is not good.
That NAB commercial's been stuck in our head for so long. Well, you have had your eye on that high street space for a while.
Suns recorded 64 tackles to Richmond's 46. They outworked them. Not too many good stat lines for the Tigers. Jaden Short did have 32 disposals, 11 marks, and gained 760 meters. Tim Taranto kicked 1-1 off 32 disposals. He had 9 marks, 8 clearances, 8 score involvements, and 564 meters gained. Daniel Rioli, 21 disposals. Shea Bolton kicked 1-2 from 19 disposals. He gained 501 meters. And Nick Glostone had 18 disposals and 10 intercepts. Round 7 marks the first time that the 2 most recent expansion teams, the Suns and the Giants, have won in the same round since round 21 of 2021. When the Suns beat an established Victorian club and it's not your own, it's so funny and adorable, especially when they do it in Victoria. The fact that we find it so adorable seems to be just an indictment of the Suns as a club as well. I mean, the Fox analysts were saying, the Suns are still a year away, but I thought this was supposed to be the year for them. They were supposed to be a year away last year, so I guess you're not drinking the Capri Sun yet. No, give me a couple wins in this upcoming stretch. Honestly, I need 3 wins in a row, if not 4 or 5 to be convinced, because I expect them to lift in Darwin again. They did last year, especially if Rosas and Jeffrey play more, but if they go 2-3 in these next 5 games, I'll think they just probably set themselves too far behind the 8 ball in the beginning, where 5-7 heading into the bye just won't cut it, but I'll feel better about them as a club. And their schedule gets a little easier the rest of the way. If they can get into the bye at 6-6 somehow, if they could win 3 of these 5, which would most likely be the Eagles and the 2 Darwin games, it would be time to take them extremely seriously. I think more likely, though, it's going to have to be... I think that 5-7 is the more likely reality, if not worse than that. But they've given themselves a chance to make some noise. Just that Freo loss hurts more and more. I think we probably took way too long to talk about that game, especially because we've got quite the Sunday finale in terms of drama and discussion. Not really in terms of accuracy, and in some moist conditions, not quite damp, but moist. Even before conditions were like that, I saw this one coming. Now, my timeline with this game was pretty interesting. Before the game, I switched my tip from Collingwood to Adelaide, seeing the Rory Laird look like a full go. I still didn't have him as my captain. I had Riley O'Brien. I won, even though Laird ended up with a better total than O'Brien. Again, my midfield absolutely balled. But at the end of the first quarter, Adelaide led 24-2, only they kicked 3-6 to get there. And I was saying already, this looks like the other 2 games they've lost, where they've had a dominant quarter where they haven't been able to cash in kicking accurately. And this is the sort of team that will not let them off the hook for it. I bet a few bucks on Collingwood, and maybe I guess I should have bet more because they ended up winning, leading for all of the last 21 seconds of clock time, the last 30 seconds in all. Adelaide 7-16-58, defeated by Collingwood 8-11-59. I feel like this is every dramatic Collingwood win rolled into one with their defensive structure and the winning a game they have no business winning and pulling through at the end, and it's just reflective of the type of games the Crows have lost. Like, the Crows could be 7-0.
And you look at the Pies' margins of victory, and you could think they could have so much worse of a record, then you realize, no, they've been in these games so often. 17 of their last 27 games have been decided by 14 points or fewer. The Pies have won 15 of those 17, all of their home and away games in that time, including finals. It's also 20 of 30 games. They're 15-5 in that stretch, just pretty insane still. It's funny that
right before they got on this run of winning tight games, they had 3 straight losses by a combined 33 points. Although that 7-point loss to the Lions in that stretch last year, they were behind by much more than that. But it's just, this transformation is insane. And as much as you want them to fall, they keep getting away with this.
You can't keep getting away with it!
And they did it without a great game from Nick Dacos. He didn't get any coaches' votes. He was all right.
He was tagged by Ben Keys in the first half, and I'm not sure why they decided to not have Keys keep running with him in the second half. That was a head scratcher. They also did this without Scott Pendlebury, whose eye was not good enough for him to play after it got scratched on Anzac Day, so
I would have been in favor of him playing with an eye patch.
the visual on that would have been really funny. Pendle's the pirate.
Pirate. Also, there was an ad for meat pies at one point that said, "We pie as what?"
I mean, it's perfect for the matchup.
Yeah, it is. As for Nick Dacos, he actually had a couple of early turnovers that were not great, and it's a credit to Collingwood as a team that they don't have to have him hold them to victory. Josh Dacos had a solid game, but I thought it was a lot of Darcy Moore. John Noble, who did not have a huge game, had a heroic play late to cut the lead to 1, where he scooped up a kick, ran for a bit, and then scored from 48 from the right side. That made it a 1-point game with 2:52 left. Also, Bo McCreary was very good. Nathan Murphy, one of the 2 Collingwood Nathans who get hurt all the time.
And both of them did in this one. Kruger cannot catch a break. He came in for Anzac Day and then hurt his knee in this one and got subbed out pretty quickly.
I'm surprised. It was actually friendly fire that got him. So first off, it wasn't a shoulder injury. It was Jamie Elliott's boot on his knee, and I thought it was just a cut, but maybe it was a pretty deep laceration or something. I don't know. But he got subbed out for Will Kelly,
One of the sons of the Pies CEO.
but this is another game that they just had no business winning, but Adelaide left the door open.
The umpires almost didn't leave the door open. There were a couple shocking calls that went against Collingwood's way. And when people are talking about the umpires doing things that went against Collingwood, you know that it was fucking bad.
When anyone that's not a Collingwood member or supporter is saying that, it's telling.
Nathan Murphy should have gotten the front on contact free after Darcy Fogarty tried to spoil and only ended up hitting him in the head. There was some blood from that, but no call. Also, as he was being helped off the ground, Jordan DeGoey ended up kicking in that direction out of clearance, and it was called deliberate out of bounds. That's not right either. There were a couple other calls as well. Umpiring was inconsistent throughout this game. Pies may have gotten the benefit of a couple calls early on, but in the end, they nearly got screwed over.
The overall umpiring definitely benefited the Crows much more.
Right near the end of the game, yes, Collingwood's younger players were some of the best performers, but Steele's side bottom really lifted at the end. He got a possession after a throw-in with about 2 minutes left. Jordan Dawson tipped side bottom's kick, but Ash Johnson forced it through for a behind, which was just another great instinct play from a young player. We saw a few of those throughout the week. Johnson made sure it went through for the point, made sure the game was tied instead of Dawson being able to get control of the ball and Adelaide being able to start back out of defense still with that 1-point lead.
That's something you only do in that situation.
And Ash Johnson knew when to do it.
This team must be so fun to coach because it's a team of guys that obviously just get it. Like, there's very little that you have to repeat when teaching them. And I think those are the most fun teams to coach. Teams that just, you tell them something once and they understand what to do.
They're a team that doesn't make the same mistake twice, except if that mistake is losing close finals, which I don't think is really a single mistake. As we're approaching a minute to go, Jack Crisp managed to escape through the midfield. Will Hoskin had hit up, guess who? Steele's side bottom in the right pocket. Side bottom missed this kick to the right for a point. So the Pies led by a point with 21 seconds left, and they were talking on First Crack after this game, wondering, did side bottom mean to kick it for a behind? Because if you look at the analytics from that, it's tougher to score from a behind in that short of a time than from a goal. Think about it. Also, just from the perspective of having to go the full length of the oval with your opponent set up ahead of the ball. rather than going from even numbers and abouts with 666. So Steel Side Bottom could have intentionally missed that. We'll just never know the answer.
I don't think he did. I think he would have probably let on if he did. But it also kind of makes it more impressive that last year against Essendon, Collingwood were able to get down so quickly.
The Crows had somewhat of a last chance, but Darcy Moore got the intercept. Moore has had a couple really strong games as an interceptor, as a leader, and also acknowledging that in the first half, the Crows were fucking marking everything. It's so funny just to hear that from him after the amazing speech that he had after the Anzac Day game. He seems to just be a really fun personality, and he seems primed for a media career after his playing days are over.
How can you not like this guy? I don't care what you think about Collingwood supporters. You have to like this guy. They trailed 57-35 with 18:49 left. Josh Dacos didn't hear the umpire say to stand, and he was called for a 50. That led to a Chase Jones goal, and at that point, you're really starting to think, oh man, they're actually kind of in deep shit.
Jones had a couple goals in a row, had a somewhat bad miss in between those. He's strung together some good performances since entering the side for Showdown. I'm glad he's gotten more full games because he was one of their go-to subs last year. And good on you, Ethan, for picking him out as a sleeper.
The Pies did respond quickly. Steel Sidebottom had an awesome play, just like drilling this ball off the ground that led to an Ash Johnson goal. That got it back to 16 with 18 minutes left, and it was down to 9 with 14:16 to go after a Josh Dacos goal, where there's kind of a tight contest, like off of a ball up that Tom Mitchell was able to free things up out of. You know, for so much of this game, there were some individual performers of the Crows that had really impressed me. I had really liked Jake Saligo's game. He had been really active altogether. Chase Jones was really solid. I thought Taylor Walker, even though his numbers weren't huge, just looks more and more like himself, even if he wasn't quite as good as he had been the prior couple weeks. Crows were in a weird spot where they're 4-3. They could be 7-0. And now they go to Geelong, and my hope is, yeah, they're probably going to kick more accurately because usually that doesn't happen 2 weeks in a row, although it did to them the first 2 rounds of the year. So I'd love for it to once again be a 2-week thing.
Then after that, the Crows play host to St. Kilda. They play the Bulldogs in Ballarat again, and they barely won that game last year because the Bulldogs couldn't kick in the wind. Then they host the Lions before going to Darwin to play the Suns. Yes, they'll beat the Eagles before going into the bye, but out of that, they got to go to the G to play Collingwood. So, not very easy this upcoming stretch for the Crows, and it's going to test them as a younger group, a group that is still building but strung together a good month of footy. Now we'll see if they can rebound from a tough defeat, pick themselves back up.
My hope is that other than the Hawthorn game, they really haven't had any duds. Like, they've played well enough to win every other game. I know they weren't great against Richmond. This is a team that should probably have at least 1 or 2 more wins right now. I'm hoping they're due for a stinker and play one at Geelong, where obviously, look, the Cats are really good at home, but this is going to be a challenging game. Stats of note for Collingwood: Josh Dacos kicked 1-1 with 31 disposals and 7 clearances. Tom Mitchell, as usual, had a bunch of very quick possessions, 29 disposals, 14 contested possessions, 7 clearances.
The difference between these past couple of years at Hawthorn and now with him at Collingwood is that he's got better players around him who are able to make better things out of the possessions that he creates for them. So he's been a really handy pickup.
Nick Dacos, 27 disposals, 475 meters gained. Jordan DeGoey, 24 disposals, 15 contested possessions, 10 clearances. Steel Sidebottom and behind in 24 disposals. Darcy Moore, 23 disposals, 10 intercepts, 588 meters. John Noble, who showed off the clutch gene against not Carlton, 23 disposals to go with his goal, 7 marks, 513 meters. Braden Maynard doing Braden Maynard things behavior-wise. He had 21 disposals and gained 504 meters. Beau McCreary had 14 disposals and 9 tackles. By disposal efficiency, this doesn't surprise me that Adelaide was the far more efficient team, 70.8 to 63.4. Free kicks, like Benjamin mentioned, 28 to 18
in Adelaide's favor.
Collingwood did record 18 more tackles, 74 to 56. which kind of fits with their game and just not giving teams much room to run. They committed 16 more turnovers, though, 91-75. Adelaide took 17 contested marks to Collingwood's 4, but failed to capitalize on a lot of them. Real quick note, Nick Dacos did not get any coaches' votes for this game, and yet still has a 12-vote lead over the next 3 guys, which, I hope people don't think we're calling him out or anything. My focus is he didn't play his best game, and the team still managed to find a way.
Speaking of coaches' votes, 9 different players had coaches' votes in this game, so the only thing on which Matthew Nicks and Craig McRae could agree was that Darcy Moore played a really good game. He got 4 votes from Nicks in all likelihood, and 5 from Fly. Jordan Dawson, who got 5 votes from Matthew Nicks, 30 disposals, 14 contested possessions, gained 696 meters. Rory Laird had 29 disposals and 7 marks. Someone on Twitter pointed out that he looks like Joel Selwood if you went into the creative player mode and made his cheekbones bigger, and now I can't unsee it. Tom Duday had 24 disposals and 14 intercepts. Jake Saligo also had 24 disposals and 13 contested possessions. I knew he'd end up being more that contested player, even with Laird in there. Good to see that he had some support in that regard. Chase Jones kicked 2-2 from 20 disposals. Brody Smith had 19 at 604 meters. Josh Rochelle kicked 4 behinds from 18 disposals, and even one of those kicks going straight could have been handy. Riley O'Brien had 44 hitouts. Expected him to get a pretty high number against whatever Collingwood threw out there, especially once Nathan Kruger was injured.
O'Brien is totally the definition of a big galoot, or like a himbo, where his job is just hit ball. He didn't have any clearances. He gets the in-outs, but he doesn't do much else. He kind of just follow the action around the ground so that if there's a ball up or throw in, you're there for it.
He's the type of ruck that we're likely to see less and less of in the contemporary game because we're seeing more and more players who take ruck contests be more capable all over the ground.
He did have an intercept to set up a goal that made it 24-2 in the first quarter, but other than that, he had a pretty blatant hold of Billy Frampton that I forget if he was the one arguing that. At some point, someone argued a pretty obvious hold, and I think that was the one.
I think so as well.
And then he also dove to try to stop Brody Majacek and just kind of came up empty to allow Collingwood a goal in the second quarter. For those of you that follow hockey, kind of Brent Burns-ish, and that's not a compliment. Well, he's good at one thing, O'Brien, and I think the nice thing is he seems to know his skill set.
As we wrap up our discussion of this game and just all the games for the round, because this was the finale, and what a finale it was, props to Collingwood's banner team for putting up a great one in South Australia. A few weeks back, you beat Black and White. The real deal's here to set things right. A good dig at both Adelaide teams in that respect.
I am always in favor of throwing shade at multiple teams at the same time. Like when Alabama sings Dixieland Delight and they, say fuck Auburn and LSU and Tennessee too. Or, any shit like build a bonfire and then, you get to talk about 2 of your rivals and you put one on the top, you put one in the middle. So I'm all in favor, and just I'm in favor of Port Adelaide wearing the prison bars, and I'm in favor of Collingwood throwing some shade like that. So that came out very well. All right. It is at this time that we go through our nominees for Mark and Goal of the Week. First off, Mark of the Week, our round 6 winner, Joe Danaher, got it against Sam Taylor. We both thought Marcus Bontempelli should have had it for the mark he took over Sean Darcy.
Neither of them were particular standouts, but we preferred Bonts. Not super offended.
Round 7, your nominees are Charlie Curnow over Shannon Hearn before just kind of playing on and snapping for his 8th goal. Josh Dunkley over James Aish. It's like the first time I've thought of James Aish in weeks. And Mitch Lewis over Taylor Duray. I got Curnow here.
As do I. Good hang time. Finished it with a goal. He was one of the big characters of this round, and this was the biggest highlight of that game.
Yeah, that's one of the textbook, if you just had a highlight reel of big marks, that's one of them. It's probably not Mark of the Year material, but it's just your classic big time mark.
The round 6 winner for Goal of the Week was Charlie Cameron, deflecting Jack Dunstan's centering kick as he jumped. That was his 2nd of 7 goals. At the time, we said give him the car. I think the car has been stolen from him, and by a teammate. So the losing kicks for this round, if other people are just voting truly: Isaac Reichert picking up a loose ball, slipping out of a Braden Maynard tackle, juking Nick Dacos and scoring. A good goal, no doubt, could easily win most weeks, as could Michael Walters kicking a dribbler along the boundary after he was allowed to play on from Harris Andrews tackling him by his arm.
The fact that Jeremy Cameron's snap from 56 that bounced through the goal square didn't even crack the top 3 says how many really good goals there were this round.
But, yeah. Will Ashcroft, just to go through it again, he deflected the ball to the boundary off of a stoppage. He tapped to it himself again, and then he had a Jackie Chan kick at a super harsh angle. The angle, by the way, was 72 degrees, 19 meters from goal.
Like, any Jackie Chan kick is badass.
Like the Daniel Wells one that won goal of the year a number of years back. Any goal off of a tap like that to yourself is badass too. Toby Dangerfield had one last year that honestly should have won him the car, and he didn't even win his week. Eddie Betts had one that should have won him another car in 2021. But to combine the tap to yourself with the Jackie Chan and it being at an angle and kicking inside of the boot on a Jackie Chan too, this is a kid playing his 7th game and he's doing that.
Now your bitch want to kick at Jackie Chan.
Good reference.
Our main character of the round, we have 3 quality honorable mentions. Charlie Curnow, 9 goals. That'll kind of do it. Tom Hawkins, 8 goals, including 4 in the first quarter. And the Eagles fan going ham celebrating Jai Cooley's goal that cut the lead to 128-44 with 5:32 left. It was this
is like someone celebrating wildly for that Chris Paul huge 3 to cut the lead to 42. And most weeks, you just say 9 goals is enough right away. But Sydney Derby happened, and the way it was won meant that Toby Greene is our main character of round 7. Not just the 4 goals, not just the game winner, the full body of work he had brought this result.
By the way, if you wanted a reminder of main characters of past rounds, in order,
he also did kick a goal in the country game, just got out back in the 4th quarter, and we both got really hyped for that.
I wanted the whole Geelong team to go celebrate with him, like, oh, who was it who kicked the goal after a really long layoff? And
like Richmond did to Michael Hurley in his finale.
Yeah, it should have been like that. It should be like that for every goal he scores, because he's awesome. But your other main characters, the Gabalites, Jamari Ewell-Hagan, Brian Taylor, the all-team should merge guy, Nick Dacos, and now Toby, who, by the way, every time he gets interviewed, I'm amused by how high his voice is and how unfitting it is. Bit of a deep cut here, but if you know Darren Ruff, baseball player, that's another one, who, like, his voice does not fit his body and his face and his style of play, and it's just, I'm always amused by people with much higher voices than they should have.
So even though there were only, a few big games for the round that really deserved a lot of attention, some great individual plays and, the big impact performances did enough to make up for, I guess, the bludgeonings that we had, especially on Saturday night. Hopefully we'll have more games that are that exciting and fewer of those just terrible, uninteresting games.
I hated having 2 shitty games like that running at the same time instead of, being like, you've got a shitty game that's kind of your background noise, and then you have the actual good game to watch. It was unfortunate scheduling.
Less background noise footy. Less baby-making footy.
That was well beyond baby-making footy. That was turn it off and go do something else footy.
Well, now you're going to turn off this podcast and go do something else, or you're just going to let it end. We'll see you soon for the Round 8 preview.
We should probably, sign off or let people know that we're on Twitter at Americans Footy.
We're on YouTube there as well. Benjamin HK01 on Twitter for me.
Castle Media for me. Cat named Brian on Instagram.
Now we're done.